and welcome back to another episode of Elite Podcast Academy. I am your host, Mike Mahoney, the founder of Elite Podcast Agency. And today I'd like to talk to you about why you need to become a podcast interview ninja. Conducting a podcast interview is a great skill for an entrepreneur to have. Not only will you learn to do a great podcast interview by mastering this skill, but you can also apply it to videos and blog posts as well. Take some time to hone your craft. We're going to dive into why this is so important. Interviews are extremely beneficial. With a podcast interview, you can generate unique and interesting content for your audience. When you conduct a podcast interview, you don't have to be the expert to deliver expert content. Based upon your public association with the podcast interview subject, you increase your level of authority. This is a huge thing and should not be underestimated. When you conduct a podcast interview, you build a relationship with the person you are interviewing, and that can lead to further growth opportunities down the line for you and your business. It's not easy to conduct an interview, and it will require preparation. You want to do this preparation to ensure that your interviews are not wasting the time of your listeners. Although most of the content is generated by the person you are interviewing, most of the responsibility to create an interview worth consuming still lies in your hands. And it's not just about asking the right questions either. It's about genuine interest, flow, vibe, sincerity, concern, digging deeper, defining the unclear, attracting stories, avoiding awkwardness, and being conscious about all of that at the same time. After conducting hundreds of interviews of my own on Yogi's Podcast Network and being interviewed on many podcasts and YouTube channels, I've learned a lot about what it takes to conduct a worth listening to interview, one that is captivating and full of content that your audience wants to hear. The first step to getting great guests is to simply ask. Most people will say yes to you. It's a smart idea not to approach the heavy hitters until you have some interviews under your belt. This will allow you to practice and build an audience. It's easier to convince someone to come on your podcast when you can say certain other respected people have already come on and you have X number of listeners. Referrals are another great place for finding good podcast interview guests. If you can't reach someone directly, get to know a friend of theirs and ask for an intro. The more well-known you are, the easier it is to convince people to join you for an interview. Most of the people I interview, either I meet in person at networking events, or I'm introduced to through networking online, or I approach them after reading about them on another blog or website. Every podcast interview must serve your audience. While every interview may help you, your brand, and your guest, the main people you want to impact are your audience. Your top priority should be to enlighten your audience. Your audience should be receiving meaningful answers that they can use. This is going to encourage them to continue consuming your content. Now, in order to service your audience, you need to know and understand your audience. You need to have a strong understanding of what your customer needs and what they want, where they come from, and what language they use to describe their problems. When conducting a podcast, you need to consider all these things when interviewing. The better a job you do at this, the more popular your podcast will become. Now, one of the best tips that I've heard for servicing your audience is to put yourselves in their place. While interviewing, I think about whether the questions are being answered in enough detail for my entire audience to understand. If the steps aren't explained or no examples are given, I ask the person I'm interviewing to break those things down. This works particularly well when I am personally curious because I want clarity too. To help you gain clarity, drop your presumptions and knowledge about the person you're interviewing and become your target audience. Then you will know what level of detail you need to dig out of the person you're interviewing. When conducting a podcast interview, take the time to get to know who you are interviewing before you start. It's true that you are conducting a podcast interview to learn more about a person and what they do. But as the interviewer, you must know a little bit more than your audience so that you can properly introduce the person and ask the right questions. Advanced preparation will help you with this. If you can find an existing interview with the person on another website, listening to that will be helpful so you can gauge their style and tone and create questions for that person accordingly. Doing this enables you to create a story. You help bring your guest's story to life. This is especially important if you're interviewing someone in a different time zone. Some things to consider are date and time, method of communication, the approximate length of the interview. Nothing sucks more than recording an entire interview only to find out later that your recording equipment failed. This is why prior to any podcast interview, you must test your recording equipment. It seems obvious, but so many don't do it. Whatever method of communication you are using, do a test right before the interview. Many people press record just before the first question of the interview, but I suggest hitting record as soon as you connect with your guest. You can see that things are working properly when you do it this way. You're going to want to prepare a list of questions that can be used as a template for your podcast interview. It will be a guide for the path you want to take, start to finish. This list of questions should not be handled like a shopping list where you hit each and every one. For each question, you should have 2 to 3 follow-up questions you might want to ask based upon the answer given. It's likely that you will not get to every question, but having them available to you will help remind you of what you wanted to ask. They will help you dig deeper into the topic at hand. There are some simple rules for the questions. Never ask yes or no questions. Never ask more than one question at a time. Keep all your questions relevant but creative. Phrase the questions in a manner that will allow your guest to expand. Offer to show the questions to your guests so they feel more comfortable. Always end the interview with a summary. This helps recap, sequence, and clarify the points for the audience and yourself. It makes you an active learner while doing the interview. It may trigger further explanation points for you to ask or your guest to bring up. It ends the storytelling loop, meaning you can move on to the next chapter in the story or move to conclude the interview. If you want to get the most out of your podcast interview, create a welcoming environment for your guest. A comfortable person, someone who feels as though they are having a conversation with a friend, will be more likely to give beefier information that benefits you and your audience. Explain to your guest that the interview is really just a conversation between two people. Explain all the details relating to the interview. Ask if they'd like to see the questions first. Thank them for the interview before you start. Have them listen to a pre-written or pre-rehearsed introduction before getting into the questions. Be enthusiastic. It may seem obvious, but you have to listen. Make sure that you are engaged with the interview. Don't just read the questions. This part is much tougher than it sounds. As an interviewer, it's extremely easy to just drift off while the other person is talking. It's not that you've become bored and uninterested, but you might just tune out while you wait for them to finish so you can move on to your next question. Don't do that. What helps is to not think of your interview as really an interview at all, but a conversation that doesn't follow a linear path. Sometimes, in tangential side stories, gold can be discovered. Always listen actively and be engaged and present. Nobody likes tuning in to an interview where the guest doesn't say much while the host rambles on and on. You need to want to understand what your guest is talking about. This gets accomplished at different levels. On a surface level, it is important to understand the situation or what's happening. What did this person do and why is it important to share? On a deeper level, it becomes much more interesting. At this deeper level, it becomes why does the person do what they do and how? Professional interviewers do a fantastic job of actually wanting to learn everything there is to learn about a person or a process. Not just the what, but also the how and the why. And I genuinely feel like it's because they want to fully understand everything. If the audio of your podcast interview is poor, the quality ruins the entire interview. Some people won't even listen if the sound quality isn't high. You must do whatever you can within your own budget to provide a high quality audio. I use a Shure PGA 48 XLR to record my shows. I also use Squadcast to conduct interviews. Squadcast allows me to record interviews from a distance. It gives me a separate track for each participant. The audio quality is excellent. I've tried multiple tools, and this one seems to be the most stable of all of them. Give it a try. Go to yogispodcastnetwork.com/squad. Now, I also use Levelator to ensure that both sides of the conversation are at the same volume level. Auphonic is another tool for this purpose. Each of these tools aims to provide optimum audio quality. They also save you an immense amount of time in post-production. Always ask how whenever you don't understand how something was done during the interview. This one tip is all you really need to be a good interviewer. If you keep asking how, drilling things down, you will keep opening new doors to ask how about. This is the key to a great podcast interview. Most people are vague or very generic when they say they did something. Some of my guests have initially been very brief when answering my questions. I might ask how they did something and they will respond with 1 or 2 sentences. Me, how did you come up with the idea for your business? Guest, I realized I liked writing, so I started a blog writing business. Answers like that do not make for a long interview and don't really give your listener anything to benefit from. In this above example, I would ask them more about how they learned to write and what skills are most difficult to learn. I would then ask them how they started their business. If you ever encounter a guest who doesn't give you in-depth answers, focus on one thing: get personal. All people, even shy people, don't like being in the limelight. They still enjoy their own lives as a subject. Ask questions that flatter and show a direct interest in the subjects that person cares about the most. Ask them to talk about where they were born, what they enjoyed growing up, what they're good at, what books they read, or anything specifically about them. It's getting personal. A quick trip down memory lane is a great way to get a person interested in opening up to you. Your job is complete when you get your guest to open up. You'll be able to allow them to speak and at the same time provide massive value to your audience. Every single answer opens the door for more questions. It's just up to you to decide which doors are the best to open. Never ask a yes or no question. Never ask more than one question at a time. Never say, and my next question is. Never allow an awkward pause. Never be disrespectful to your guest or your audience. Never forget to be present with your guest. Never keep your mouth on your microphone or breathe into your microphone while your guest is speaking. Never rely too much on notes or research as it distracts you from remaining present. Never forget that you are serving your audience. Now that's been a little summary. A podcast interview needs to be fun. If you have fun, it makes the interview so much better. If you make it seem like a task or a chore, it's going to reflect in the interview itself. Now get out there, have fun, enjoy this experience, develop new relationships, and generate some amazing content when you become a podcast interview ninja.